Welcome, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful start to your day if you're here in Europe, and I hope you've had a nice day, productive day, if you are joining in from a bit further ahead in the time zones. But we are here today to have a conversation about destinations catalyzing climate action. This is our June Feeling the Pulse session. And we have some very exciting guests with us today. So we have Dr. Miriaki. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. She is joining us as a lecturer in tourism and hospitality from the University of Queensland. And we also have Matti Polari. Again, so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but Matti is project manager with Visit Tampere. So they will be joining us today. And of course, I also have Jamie with me. We have Guy with us. And as always, Julia is behind the screen. So just to take you through, as always, this session is recorded. We, of course, welcome questions, but if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box or raise your hand. If you could stay muted during the session, that would be really great. You can also select speaker view in your Zoom, and that gives you the best view of our slides and the presentation throughout. If you have any technical difficulties or any challenges at all, again, please pop them in the chat box. Myself and Julia will be joining us. Oh, and as always, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Elle, and I am a change maker in the GDS movement, and I will be your host today. So if you have any questions, please let us know. And as always, feel free to use your reactions. The agenda today will be an introduction from Jamie in regards to climate action and the role of the DMO. Then we will have Mireia in talking about, are we doing all that we can, understanding the destination tourism emissions and actions. Then there will be a short breakout room and discussion. And then we are returning into the main room for Matti's presentation, from theory to practice and what they have done in Finland at Visit Tampere. And then Guy will take us out with some carbon offsets and removals. So over to you, Jamie.
That's great. Thanks very much. So really, this is a kind of introduction to climate change and tourism and the role of the DMO. And some of the things really just wanted to go over the basics. And many of you will be familiar with it, but sometimes it's good to remind ourselves of what all these kind of terms mean and what we're talking about. So as we've all kind of seen, especially over the last couple 2-3 years and even the beginning of this year, breaking all records, and the weather is getting more extreme. We have increasing heat waves. Things that were only supposed to happen once every 50 years now happen once every 10 years. At the moment, different parts of the world are searing in heat, more storms, more increased rain and snowfall, or decreased snowfall in some areas. So everything is changing and getting more intense. So climate change is no longer something that's happening in the future. It's definitely here now, and we can already feel the impact. And tourism events are a clear contributor to climate change, right? It's estimated that global tourism contributes around, let's say, 10% of carbon emissions, which is substantial. And current predictions for business as usual growth in tourism and events would significantly increase these emissions relating to tourism. So that's kind of a big question mark. How do we avoid the emissions attached to business as usual and continue thriving and growing as a sector, but decoupling that from carbon emissions? But you know, tourism contributes to the problem, but tourism also stands to suffer the consequences of climate change, and potentially more than some other sectors. And some of your destinations, and especially we've definitely seen how some destinations are already impacted, whether it's their coastlines and landscapes, historical buildings, outdoor events and activities will be impacted by climate change. And, you know, we can already see that certain things, if you're very reliant on leaf peeping, for example, or how staff are treated because it's too hot, or water levels in rivers that disrupt cruises. Again, a lot of these impacts we're already seeing. And most recently, and, you know, I think incredibly poignantly this past weekend, we've kind of seen people are dying from this, right? It's not just, oh, well, it's a bit rainy, a bit more rainy on my holiday. It's affected people, especially Greece, has been hard hit with the impacts of climate change last year, and the heat wave this year, has already shown that maybe as a destination, and Greece will not be the only one, they just make the headlines at the moment, we're not as prepared to protect the people, but also the visitors that come, and that not everybody is as well informed. And there's some real need to put some infrastructure in place and plan ahead. So really climate changes, and I think this varies from destination to destination, but we've often spoken about reducing carbon emissions, so which is about climate mitigation, so preventing the carbon emissions of or greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, which makes climate change worse. So obviously that is super important, so we can kind of reduce the intensity of climate change. But as we said, unfortunately, climate change is here and it's happening now, and it will continue to happen. So there's an element of adaptation that we also need to work on, and that's really about anticipating those effects of climate change and taking appropriate action to prevent or at least minimize the damage that can be caused, and potentially take advantage of some of the opportunities that may arise. So just to even think about what are some of the aspects where DMOs can kind of start thinking about climate adaptation. So there's a strategic planning piece around really thinking about, and you can work with the climate experts in your city and that are already working on adaptation and have a good understanding of what's going to be happening in the future, right? So really thinking about that and saying, well, what's the potential impact on tourism and visitors in our destination? How can these current and future climate changes, whether it's climate dependent products like skiing, that's a very obvious one, but also shifts in travel patterns. So already increasingly we're seeing people potentially not going to the really areas that can get really hot in summer, but choosing other destinations. And then using that knowledge and developing kind of more long-term strategic plans. So that kind of think about that and integrate those adaptation measures. So it can be very practical, like infrastructure resilience, but also kind of diversify your tourism offering. So having a more strategic approach to adaptation. And then obviously helping the tourism businesses in the destination adapt. So providing training courses, resources, and incentives for tourism businesses. Again, many businesses might not really be thinking about being climate ready unless they're in a flood prone area and they have to deal with those things all the time. But again, there's some very practical things that they can do to kind of minimize the damage to the business and support them in recovery. Diversifying the offering. So if you really have a very weather dependent or climate dependent offering, is there an opportunity to kind of support and promote the development of different tourism products? And provide resources to do that. So, whether, again, skiing is a very obvious one. So if there's no snow in the future, what other things can be, products can be developed around mountain biking? Or even if it's particularly, you have a lot of outdoor events and it's going to be a lot rainier, then there might be just different kinds of products or in different places and venues. Biodiversity conservation is a really important point of tackling climate change, tackling the biodiversity crisis, but also supporting the planet in adapting. And there's a real opportunity there, and biodiversity and landscapes are an important part of tourism to kind of help how tourism and businesses can invest in conservation. And then obviously for those destinations that already experience these extreme weather events, crisis management is very much like in that moment. Like, are you ready in Canada? We've been speaking to some destinations there and the wildfires that they had to deal with. Is tourism or tourism events and the businesses ready to kind of have the protocols in place and rapidly respond, have the communication plans in place to deal with those climate crises? And this may be more immediate for some destinations than for others, but again, going back to the first point of strategic planning, it can be really useful to just understand what those potential crises might be and impacts and plan for those. But kind of with a view to mitigation, so going back to the needing to reduce our carbon emissions, it really means that looking at the previous graph, that business as usual isn't really an option. And that means that destinations and tourism and events really need to make a clear commitment to net zero targets and developing their roadmap. Oh, yeah, sorry. So net zero, I did want to make a point. Often it's like, oh, net zero by 2050. But what's really important here is the kind of targets by 2030, because that's where we need to see most of the carbon reductions. So what is net zero? Some of these terms that we bandy about. So essentially the definition is the state when the balance of the amount of the greenhouse gases produced and the amount of removed from the atmosphere is zero. So that's the very official definition, but really, what does that mean? And here my trusty bathtub example, which maybe some of you have seen already, but it's really kind of thinking about all the carbon emissions that we that are coming out is like the tap in a bathtub really filling up the bathtub fast. But we have a bit of a carbon budget, right? The bathtub is only so big. If we want to avoid the worst of climate change and everything spilling over, there's only so much water we can let into the tub. So what are our two options, right? We can turn down the tap as much as possible. So that's reducing carbon emissions. But obviously we also have a plug hole where we can drain out water. So that's kind of the carbon capture, where the idea of offsetting or reducing, comes in, removing the carbon from the atmosphere. Now, that plug hole is so big, but not that big. It's not big enough to really counteract all the water that's coming in at the top. So we very much need to look to reduce our carbon emissions by 90%. So we can look to offset or remove those remaining kind of 10% to remain the equilibrium in the bathtub to stay at around 1.5 degrees. But why net zero? So the scientists have looked at this and said, if we want to keep global warming to ideally 1.5 degrees, but no more than 2 degrees, this is how many carbon emissions we have, which means we need to achieve net zero by around about 2050. And you can see there, it's a very minor example, but the impact of climate change, there is a difference if it's 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. And I know, many already think we will not achieve keeping climate change to 1.5 degrees, but every degree here counts. It's not all or nothing. Just because we don't achieve 1.5 degrees, 1.7 degrees is still better than 2 degrees. So we still need to keep on working on that. We also kind of wanted to clarify the carbon neutral or net zero. So those are, again, terms we often use that sometimes are used interchangeably, but that are essentially not exactly the same. So the main difference between carbon neutral and net zero is the time frame, but also how the target is reached. So carbon neutrality is almost a bit of a short-term state. So something that companies can achieve quite quickly if they measure their carbon emissions, implement some reduction actions, but then they purchase carbon credits or offsets to balance those emissions. Often, it might depend on the company, but often this is focused only on carbon emissions, potentially not on all greenhouse gas emissions, and often only looks at scope 1 and 2 emissions, so the most immediate under their control. And I'll talk a little bit more about scopes in a second. Whereas net zero is really that long-term goal that needs to be achieved when, a company, or more likely a country or as a whole, we've kind of set those ambitious targets to, over that time frame. We'll take all the actions we can to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's carbon, but also methane and all the other ones. And normally we, again, as I mentioned, look at a 90% reduction of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And those emissions we can't avoid, because there will always be some left, need to be kind of neutralized through carbon removal. So not just any old offset, and Guy will tell us a bit more about the offsetting and removal difference a little bit later on. So carbon neutrality can be very much a part on that journey to net zero, but net zero is kind of that longer term ambition that we need to have. So just as I said, what are scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions? So scope 1 and 2 are more the things that any company, here's an example of a tour operator, controls immediately. So a tour operator's vehicle, or how they heat their offices, or the electricity they use. But as you can imagine, with a tour operator, most of the emissions happen, the transport provided, the accommodation, the activities, the food eaten, employee travel, waste, all those things are scope 3. So that usually makes up a massive part of anybody's emissions, but especially so for some companies. So going back to making sure tourism is part of the solution and developing a net zero roadmap, tourism and events, we've had the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism, which many of you have heard of, which really sets out those targets and goals for tourism to align with a net zero target, but also the 2030 target, and take action in kind of 5 key areas, so the 5 pathways that it sets out. That's obviously to measure, to even understand where you are, and to set those targets, to decarbonize, so to mitigate, as we said before, to regenerate. So that's really investing in that adaptation and in biodiversity. And none of us are on our own in this, so we also need to collaborate and share ideas and learn from each other. And finance is really, yes, finance with money, but and making sure you don't just have a climate action plan and that's not funded with resources, with knowledge, with money. So those are some really key areas that destinations and anybody needs to look at. And especially in the destination context, it's interesting because the climate risks are really felt there. It's like where all the tourism value chain comes together. But at the moment, and this is changing slowly, but there's kind of fewer tools and resources available for destinations. But there's a lot of people working on this to understand that better. And we are also looking to support destinations with this. So there's a really great opportunity within destinations to take innovation and to take action and lead by example. So there is some research done by Leeds Beckett and the Travel Foundation to look at, okay, so destinations, DMOs can do something, but what are kind of the enablers and the barriers? And there's some relatively obvious ones, but important ones. So obviously a poor understanding of where the DMO fits in to taking climate action, not enough kind of knowledge, whether it's very technical knowledge or just that climate literacy, and then maybe that lack of data sharing and tools and templates. So what would really help is that clear mandate for a DMO and what is my role in this, and making resources available, building those partnerships, right, locally, but also internationally and across sectors. And that training and knowledge building is really important too. So at the GDS movement, we've definitely recognized this for a while, and it's always been climate action has been part of the index for cities, but we really this year wanted to reflect on that role of the DMO and to see, okay, how can we make sure that one, the DMO as an organization kind of walks the talk? So do you measure your own organization's carbon emissions and set targets and build knowledge within the team and across all the functions, because it's really increasingly important to see what the marketing team does through a climate action lens, what the finance team or purchasing team does through kind of a climate lens. So everybody can help the organization move in the right direction. But then obviously supporting the industry, supporting all the businesses out there for them to, again, measure their carbon emissions, make an action plan, deliver workshops and provide tools so they can make their contribution to reduce emissions. And then guiding the sector, really looking at the DMO or the city supports the sector as a whole to say, okay, how are tourism events part of the solution and what can we do and where is really our leverage? And that international collaboration piece is really important to also understand how other destinations are approaching it and kind of really considering that strategic approach from the DMO's perspective. So actually, on that note, I am very excited to hand over to Maria, who's done a lot of work around this and to really look at how what destinations have done already and where the best levers or the biggest impact lies. So I will stop sharing and hand over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Jenny. Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm very glad to be able to continue the discussion with you on, on the role of destinations in climate mitigation, particularly. So we're going to be discussing, are we doing all we can? And in answering this question, the underlying consideration is whether we can continue in the with the pathway that in which we are, right? Can we thrive for generations to come? It is unlikely, given that we are in planetary overshoot. We have crossed already 6 out of the 9 boundaries of safe planetary living. Those are processes that regulate the stability and continuity and resilience of our planet, which allow us to thrive. And one of them is climate change. And well, we're going to focus on that. And we have our window for acting is actually closing down. If the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees is not a hopeful target, but a hard limit, every day it's a hard limit that is more difficult to achieve. This is exactly the time that we have with the remaining carbon budget to actually achieve the 1.5. As you can see, is even sooner than 2030, given the current emission trends and given the current policy actions that are taking place globally. But of course, there is urgency, but we can be optimistic. There is agency because each of you can take action, and you can take action in climate mitigation through your climate action plans, which should be a collection of actions that are purposefully coherent and structured to achieve the interim and end goals. But those climate action plans cannot just be busy, but we need to make sure we are focusing where we can make the biggest difference. And so to answer this question, where we can make the biggest difference, we need to understand where tourism emissions come from longitudinally, and what is your capacity as DMOs to influence change in each of those sources of emissions. So we looked with our colleagues at University of Queensland, we looked at a longitudinal carbon footprint inventories across several destinations at city, region, and national level, and we identified 9 macro level factors that drive emission changes over time. And those we categorize them as demand, supply, and destination factors. Of course, understanding that any changes in demand of long-haul travel will trigger changes in supply, new regional airports, or changes in supply, new luxury hotels will trigger demand, of course. But to simplify, there are 3 demand, 3 supply, and 3 destination factors. So in terms of demand, what drives changes in emissions is going to be how many tourists visit us, how much they spend on what they spend. And of course, then what they spend matters because different products, as we know, have different carbon intensities. It's not the same a 5-star hotel than a campsite or a national park than an amusement park. Then at the supply level, it's about our tourism businesses, how much energy efficient the tourism businesses are, how much renewable energies do we rely upon, and how much green is our supply chain, how much do we rely on imports versus local products, or in circular economy versus linear and waste, for instance. And then at the destination level, we have specific characteristics that we cannot change. If we are an island destination, it's likely we're going to rely on long-haul aviation. And actually, aviation may account between 38 to up to 82% of the tourist carbon footprint for certain island destinations. But also the spatial structure, that is, how do we distribute tourists within our destination? When we choose to distribute tourists to regional areas, to remote areas, that will have a carbon footprint attached to it, unless we plan for low carbon transport. Then we have capital investment in infrastructure. Any investments that we do right now in terms of new airports, railway connections, or any other developments that we can think of are locking up emissions for many years to come. So our decisions right now matter. And then finally, we have the market mix, which is basically the share of different visitor market segments, because each of them will have a different carbon footprint depending on how far they come from, the geographical distance, how long do they stay, what type of activities do they do within our destination, and the luxury level attached to it. So of course, these factors are not new. We intuitively know some of them, but the important is to have them upfront in our minds when we plan climate action. So purposefully, we can target each of these factors when designing our climate mitigation actions. And when designing climate mitigation, you can start to think, well, how my organization relates to each of those factors? For some of them, you may have direct control. Well, you are a marketing organization, then certainly you can take a lot of action in trying to optimize the market mix. Or if you are part of the planning, on tourism planning, you may take some action on the scale growth. But then in many of those factors sit outside your control. That doesn't mean you cannot do anything about it. The idea is that you are aware that then your role is to influence change among businesses through the supply chain. So uptake of renewables, more energy efficiency or greener supply chains, also influence consumer behaviors, right, to transition to lower carbon footprint activities and products within your destination. And then also you have a role potentially to coordinate and responsible lobby for large-scale policy changes in terms of transport, in terms of energy, and then of course the large-scale investments in infrastructure. So we were curious, after identifying these from the longitudinal studies, we were curious to know, okay, are we as destinations targeting those emission factors? And we looked at the Glasgow Declaration and Tourism Declares Climate Emergency, and what were destinations pledging and planning under these schemes. Of course, you may be here present today and may not be represented just because the cutoff point of this research. We know there's much more actions outside the ones I can provide to you today. But certainly there's some learning here. And what we learned is that well, half of the organizations pledging publish a plan within a year, which is the agreement within the Glasgow Declaration. And those plans are much more comprehensive, both in terms of the actions they take and also the factors that they target within these 9 macro level factors that drive emissions. Yet, the majority of the actions that destinations are pledging and including in their plans are very general. They are what we call support actions. It's about advocacy, sharing knowledge, collaboration, capacity building, which are very important. But those actions should be more specific to target these decarbonization factors, because we may collaborate to improve our capacity to measure emissions at the destination level. We may do capacity building for improving our greening our supply chain, right? So there needs to be a bit more concrete type of actions as long as we want to measure change afterwards. Then when we look at the different factors, if we look at the demand, we can see that no destination so far of the 28 we looked at is targeting the growth in tourism numbers. And unfortunately, across all the studies that we reviewed, exponential and growth of tourism numbers is what is driving increase of emissions over time, between 1% to 21% annual compound growth across all destinations, because technology efficiency is only able to offset half of this increase in demand so far. We see here, nonetheless, some of the actions that are in green. That means that we consider those actions are concrete enough for actually the destination to measure change. We can see some of the destinations are attempting to increase the average length of stay of visitors, or providing preferential marketing of low carbon products and itineraries. Yet we see also some actions highlighted here in red for visitor consumption, which are a bit too general for the destination later to be able to measure the change achieved with those actions. Nonetheless, we see, okay, destinations are putting efforts in terms of increasing awareness of public transport options, local products, or using visitor pledges to change the behavior of tourists. At the supply level, we see that that's where destinations are putting much more effort, specifically in improving the energy efficiency of tourism businesses and greening the supply chain. We see here highlighted in yellow 2 actions which refer to actions that the destination takes in terms of engaging in measuring their own carbon footprint as an organization and monitoring change. Those are important actions for the credibility of the organization, of the destination management organization, but of course will have a minimal effect in the overall tourism emissions. We also see some destinations, very few, that have engaged in calculating the total destination's carbon footprint. It is a complex process, calculating the carbon footprint of a whole destination. Nonetheless, if we do not have a baseline, how can we measure a change, right? So that's a critical question that I'm just throwing out there. That doesn't mean that we need to have perfect calculations, but we certainly need some indication about the baselines for our destinations if we want to be able to show progress over time. In terms of energy efficiency, well, we promote green certifications, provide carbon footprint calculators, including a catalog of actions and measures suggested for the businesses, trainings, and also financial support. And then at the supply chain, it's about providing guidelines, partnerships for local procurement, also green itineraries and circular economy practices. But also importantly here in green, you as a destination organization, you may have the possibility to embed net zero conditionality in different contractings in terms of funding or marketing activities that you do. And then at the destination level, we can see that while we have a lot of destinations suffering from over-tourism and trying to redistribute tourists across the regions with its potential economic benefit, the carbon cost of doing that is not being taken into account. So there is no actions in terms of special structure of the destination. How do we ensure transportation options are low carbon when we try to redistribute tourists in regions? When we have actions that refer to green transport, the question is how much of those actions that are included in the plans would happen anyway, even without the destination management and marketing organization, because it would be a plan to undertake by the transport department. So again, it's about how concrete, as much concrete as possible, we should make our plans and actions within the plans, the better, because then we can attribute and measure change based on the actions we are committing as destinations. And finally, we have the market mix, where marketing is one of the main foundations of destination marketing organizations. And we have only 6 organizations actually out of the 28 that we reviewed, looking at profiling different visitor markets based on the carbon, on their mobility patterns, looking for climate optimal markets, and understanding or shifting the indicators from just value to value per unit of CO2 emissions. And of course, marketing domestic and nearer markets is something that some destinations are starting to do. So we were interested, after looking at the existing plans, we were interested on looking at whether there is alignment between what we found in the plans and what destination experts think. And we did some survey, and we asked destination managers, what do you think is the feasibility of taking action against each of the 9 macro level destination factors, and what is the effectiveness of reducing carbon emissions should we take action in any of those? And what we see is that destination experts tended to be over optimistic in terms of the feasibility of taking action. Imagine number 9 is the market and demands mix, and it's here as a high feasibility, but only 6 out of the 28 that we looked at actually is taking action on these aspects. And there was also an overestimation and underestimation both of the effectiveness that we can have in targeting different factors. For example, number 1 is the scale growth and is here, and we've seen rapid increase of tourism numbers. It is what drive emissions across all the destinations, because right now we are decarbonizing slower. So as long as we add more tourism numbers, we have just seen an increased trend of emissions. So we're planning at the University of Queensland to develop a toolkit as well, based on these 9 macro level decarbonization factors to help destinations target these factors. So moving forward, basically, how can we ensure we create effective climate action plans? Well, it's about understanding your organization, where you're at your destination, understanding where emissions come from at the destination level, and what is the capacity to influence those. Because some of the plans rely a lot on actions that the DMO cannot achieve by its own, right? So as long as you rely on actions of your businesses to change their behavior, or the consumers to change their behavior, rather than committing to actions that they can do by themselves. So using this knowledge, where emissions come from, my capacity to influence them, to inform climate action, of course, participating in such type of initiatives such as today and the GDS and any other networks that exist within your destination or internationally to share best practices. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily doing more, but doing more relevant and meaningful action. Because as the climate clock tells us, there is urgency, but you have agency. It's not a matter of if we act, but how fast, the speed and scale of our actions, so we ensure our industry can thrive in the future. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. We welcome also your thoughts, and I know you're going to be doing an activity afterwards related to this. I look forward to know more about your thoughts about this framework.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Mireia. Yes, we do have a short window to ask Mireia any questions you might have. She does have another commitment that she needs to dash off for, so we do have limited time. If there are any questions that we don't manage to ask, please do make sure to add them in the chat, and we will make sure that we pass them on to Mireia and she can answer them, and we will make sure that's added in the follow-up email. But are there any questions so far? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Any questions? Anyone feel free to raise your hand or pop anything in the chat.
I think Guy raised his physical hand.
Go for it, Guy.
Mireia, thank you very much for your speech. I'd like to go back to something, maybe you can go in a bit more detail. What do you think of the common mistakes that we're making at the moment? And you did touch on this a little bit, but maybe you can just expand on that.
Well, I think we may be doing the low-hanging fruits. And of course, it is a challenging position. Climate is very contested, and any actions we take are going to be political at the end of the day. Even deciding what gets included or excluded in a carbon footprint inventory at the tourism destination is already a political decision, because anything that gets included in that carbon footprint will need to be accounted for in terms of decarbonizing. The challenge is that on the action plans, we tend to see a lot of commitment for influencing change of actions that need to be changed by others. So destinations tend to commit for businesses to change. And what can I do to change the businesses? What can I do to change the consumers? Which is important aspects of how we decarbonize. But then the destination has within their control in general, well, the marketing, right? It's one of the key characteristics of destination management and marketing organizations. And some of them, as part of the public planning, right? They have capacity to plan tourism. And within the planning tourism, there is the question of growth. And how do we manage that? Because across all the 29 studies that we reviewed that exist nowadays, growth is the reason why we keep increasing emissions, because we are growing too fast for the technology efficiencies. So it's similar to if you look at a hotel chain. As long as you keep adding new hotels, even if you are more efficient, you are not net zero. So every addition of a new hotel will lead to increased emissions at the end of the day. So the same occurs right now with destinations.
We're coming back to Janie's famous bath. We're not turning the tap off, are we?
Yeah.
So there was a really interesting piece of work done. I'm not sure if you were involved in this at all, by Professor Xavier Font and a few others that we were involved in this, looking at DMOs and how they use the data that's available to make decisions. And in that research, we noticed that we kind of get a lot of DMO leaders kind of get stopped and blocked when they see the scary data and what that actually means in terms of growth. And that, we have to turn the tap off. which is complex, right? It's difficult.
It is. There's not simple action, no simple answer. Let's say it's just that probably we can continue to look away for a few years, but we won't. If we want our industry to thrive and to be relevant by 2050, I would say we cannot continue to look away of the difficult questions that we need to ask ourselves. Yeah.
Totally.
And certainly this goes beyond the sustainability experts within the destinations. It's about the political aspects within the destinations, because that's as much as one can do as an individual within an organization, which is a lot of influencing change. But especially when we touch on the growth, certainly that's usually beyond the scope of that individual. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria.
We are running out of time. I see your hand is up. Jess, is it a very quick question? Because Maria really do need to dash off.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gui. I was just wondering where a DMO can be more instrumental as an activist to change policy. Government organizations or departments have some say, but I'm not sure how much at a federal level. I'm curious to know if your research has showcased any potential opportunities. Thank you.
So again, this will depend. When we talk about destination management and marketing organizations, they are very different. It depends on the different ownerships. You might be public, part of the public government, or public-private, or fully private, depending on the destination. And you might be at the local, regional, or national level. So the power that you have to influence change, they will depend largely on your ownership and the level in which you are. And then, of course, the good relationships you have with the other departments, especially for large-scale policy changes. It will also depend on the share of, how much tourism contributes to the GDP, for example, within your country. That can be one of the ways in which you can influence a bit more change, because what we saw across all these studies is that tourism is decarbonizing slower than its suppliers. That means that in the long run, as long as we do not step up our decarbonization, this 10% that Jenny not suggested because it's actually tested, right, of our contribution to global emissions will be bigger as long as we decarbonize slower than the rest of industries. And we are finding that across the destinations, tourism is decarbonizing slower than others. So if you're part of the public government, certainly this will be an issue in the medium term, probably. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is really great. Thank you so much, Maria. Any other questions that come up, please do add them in the chat or send them to us in an email, and we will make sure that we get an answer for you. We are now moving into our breakout room. So we will be back here in this room again for Matti's presentation at 10 a.m. European time. So that's on the hour, so in 15 minutes. In the breakout room, you will be divided into groups. And if you could please just take a brief moment to consider the questions and the areas that Maria just presented to us. So how has your destination already taken action, really with the focus on the 3 areas on demand, supply, and destination? There are post-it notes in the Miro board. If you're not familiar with Miro, please note that on the left-hand side of your screen as you're logging in, there's a little toolbar. You can navigate either by dragging and dropping or scrolling with your mouse. There will be someone in your room most likely that will know how to be able to help you, but we will also drop in to the breakout room. So if there are any questions, please let us know. Julia has just shared the Miro board link in the chat, so please click that, and then in your breakout groups, considering the 3 areas and how your destination has already taken action. And we will be back here in the main session for Matti's presentation on the hour. So Julia, please go ahead and start the breakout rooms.
Yes, I will. Just a little reminder in the Miro board, if you could write your destination, the destination you're representing on the post-it, that would be also amazing. So please go ahead, open the Miro link, and see you back at 10 Have a nice chat.
"15 minutes are never enough." But welcome back everyone from your breakout rooms. We will be looking at it. I can see there are quite a few post-it notes on the Miro board. So thank you so much for contributing. We really appreciate it, and we're very excited to be reading over what everyone has been added in. But we are now jumping right back in again with Matti Polari from Visit Tampere in Finland. So Matti, welcome, and off you go.
All right, thank you, plentiful. All right, I'll share my screen and let's see how it goes, and then we'll go straight to business. Just a moment. All right, so greetings from Tampere, the sauna capital of official sauna capital of the world. I'm working as a development manager of sustainable tourism here in Visit Tampere, and we, of course, as the DMO, are responsible for advancing climate action in our destination. And I'll try to just give you a really brief glimpse to our pathway towards climate neutrality, and especially to our collaboration with City of Tampere, which is, of course, crucial for us for our success in this work. To start off and to give you some background for the climate work also, here's Tampere in a few words. We are the largest inland city actually of the Nordics, and with 250,000 inhabitants, we are the second largest urban area in Finland. We are the sauna capital of the world and hometown to the world's only museum. And as a destination, we like to sort of think of ourselves as the perfect combination of urban life and nature attractions. And therefore, of course, sustainability is a crucial issue and close to our heart. Tampere as a city is one of the EU mission cities and aims to be climate neutral in 2030. And for us, of course, the main idea here is to take tourism industry in our destination to the sort of forefront of the city level development and align our work and our goals with the City of Tampere. Briefly about the climate work and the roadmap that the City of Tampere has made. Tampere has invested quite a lot to improving green energy supply, heating, and also electricity, and also improving public transport, providing sustainable mobility options, focusing on tram lines and better bus services, and also electric bus services, and also on walking and cycling, improving the facilities in the city center. For tourism companies, of course, the availability of green electricity, green heating is one of the main issues, and one set of which provides the groundwork for the company level climate actions. So that is a super important thing for the companies, and maybe more for us as a destination, the availability of sustainable mobility options within the destination, and especially walkability and cyclability of the city center. Those are main issues for our climate work and also for improving the attractiveness of our city as a destination to visit. Just maybe to sort of further enhance the last point, One of our key strengths as a destination is that we have major part of our accommodation and also our attractions and event venues within a 10-minute city center, reachable especially by foot. And of course, most of the other attractions are also easily reachable with public transport and the new tramway lines. So that's a main strength for us in our climate actions. Of course, a large portion of our visitors are domestic, and we are in a hub of railway connections from all around Finland. So for the arrival to our destination, that is the other key strength. So we have, utilizing the railways and the railway connections, we are also able to provide a low carbon option to come to Tampere, especially for the domestic visitors. That is the background from the city level, and now closer look to the actual development we are doing in the tourism sector and as a DMO. First of all, we have set a strategic goal of carbon neutral tourism and event sector in our current tourism strategy, linked of course closely to increasing the share of tourism income here in Tampere, and of course the main idea is to improve the carbon efficiency of our tourism business. So, well, basically making as much money as possible with minimum climate impacts. That's the key point of the whole strategic development for us. To further guide us towards this objective, we published in the beginning of 2022 our carbon neutral destination roadmap. And our key objectives for the roadmap was first to address the largest sustainability challenge of tourism industry, and to be a positive actor finding the solutions to this challenge, and also to be part of international networks seeking those solutions. Of course, it is a joint challenge, and we wanted to sort of focus our sustainability actions to a certain key focus point, and that's why we chose carbon neutrality to be the key target for our actions, and also for engaging the business sector in our region. Third point was, of course, to be able to also respond to the growing customer demand for low carbon tourism options, help companies to address this demand, and work together as a destination to enable low carbon visit in the destination. And the fourth point was, of course, to align our goals with the city level goals and also the goals of the region. So this way we would also be able to tighten our collaboration with the city, which is crucial for us. Well, once we had set the strategic goal and also published the roadmap, it was quite a natural step for us to also join the signatories of Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism, and also build the climate action plan, which is required from the signatories. So the roadmap was more a vision level paper, setting the main target, giving us guidelines how to reach it, and sort of giving us the vision towards the future and what would be the sort of end goal we would be striving for. The climate action plan is more a sort of yearly updated to-do list which we will be implementing yearly and also updating according to the success of those actions and which we can adjust. Also, with, for example, the inspiration and insight which was already provided in the previous presentations this morning. This is also very important and super interesting, and it was great to see that we were pretty well aligned with the development ideas from other regions and in the sort of global network, what everyone else is doing also. So it's great to have examples from and learnings from other destinations. For us, our key sort of strategic choice was to focus our actions on the company level. So in the measuring of carbon footprint and climate actions, our focus is on helping the companies to calculate their footprint, plan their climate actions, prioritize their climate actions, and we at that help them to decarbonize their business. There we are utilizing the open source carbon footprint calculator and management tools provided by Visit Finland. They are a crucial tool for us in the success and in helping companies. But us as a destination, we in monitoring the success, we are focusing on following the advancement of companies. So how many companies are calculating their footprint? How is their carbon footprint and also carbon efficiency of their business developing? So that is the long-term goal for us, to get a better view to the development level of the companies in our area. And in that also the tools provided by Visit Finland are a super important tool for us to utilize, and also link our actions to national level development and to the development actions of other destinations in Finland. In decarbonizing actions, of course, our role is to provide knowledge, trainings, and also enhance cooperation of companies. So those are sort of the basic things we are doing with companies and how we are helping them. Another key issue, especially about the cooperation on destination level, is co-designing or a co-design process to enable visitors to have a climate-friendly, low-carbon stay in Tampere region. So there we need to link low-carbon offerings of different companies together, get companies to collaborate, and also find ways to communicate these offerings to visitors in a way that they fall under the green claim directive of the EU level, and also to avoid false green claims, and on the other hand to inspire and engage visitors. So that's a super important thing, and that is a thing where we need destination level collaboration. Another thing that is maybe more a responsibility of DMOs is developing sustainable tourism mobility services, and therefore we have build a sustainable tourism mobility action plan for our destination to sort of enable us to better focus also our development actions in mobility and also collaboration with companies. And of course, on the pathway towards climate neutrality and net zero, we also need to develop a carbon capture and offset model and tools which are reliable and effective and also linked to supporting biodiversity. This is maybe the first step in regenerative actions in climate work. And the final note is launching Urban Climate Leaders Network. That's all about the collaboration on destination level. I'll say a few more words about that in the end. But before that, just a few examples of the tools and sort of company level forerunners and success stories that we have here in Finland and in Tampere. I already told you about the carbon footprint calculator tool and knowledge management tools that Visit Finland is offering to us. These are especially important for us in engaging SMEs and the smaller companies, because larger companies and enterprises, they have more resources and they have in many cases their own tools for carbon management. But this is especially important for also getting the SMEs involved and enhancing the destination level collaboration in climate action, and also enhancing the national collaboration. We are utilizing these tools and Sustainable Travel Finland program. In Tampere, we are of course a small DMO and we have limited resources. Therefore, we need to collaborate with the city, but we also need the forerunner companies. And Tampere Hall Event Center is one of the long-term forerunners from the 1990s in sustainability issues and also in climate action. They have, for example, created the carbon neutral event concept, which provides an option to organize a carbon neutral event in Tampere Hall. And also together with Courtyard Marriott Tampere, they form a carbon neutral city block. So this is also an interesting concept and just an example of the really ambitious and impressive climate actions and energy efficiency and so on actions that they have carried out throughout the decades. So these kind of companies provide us the example and sort of inspiration also to the other companies in our region. And as a final example about the sustainable mobility development, here is the e-car adventure concept that we developed in collaboration with Avis. So this is maybe just to emphasize the idea that especially sustainable tourism mobility, it's all about service creation and also just utilizing the sort of collaboration with already existing actors in the field and just cooperating and designing the existing services to fit better the goals of sustainable mobility and the climate work also. And as a final note, few words about our climate, urban climate leaders in tourism network. So here the main idea is just to get the leading major companies, major attractions in our destination to join in to collaborate with the city, tighten the collaboration, and with this collaboration, getting the main operators to collaborate with us to accelerate the transition towards climate neutral travel. Of course, the major companies have also they have the means to make the biggest impact. So they are the crucial collaborators for us as a city, and of course also they benefit from cooperation with the city level and city level actions. Work here is very much in the beginning because we launched this network in May 2024, but the first actions we are taking is to get a better view to the challenges that are awaiting for us in the future. What sort of challenges we should be preparing for, and with that knowledge to find the best ways that this network and group of actors could also be the positive change makers and building a more sustainable future and building the climate neutral tourism in our destinations. So I'm really inspired about this Urban Climate Leaders Network, and hopefully it will also be an inspiration to other city destinations and also, well, accelerate the transition towards climate neutral travel in Finland and maybe in the future, hopefully also international. More information can be found in our website, so visit tampere.fi, and of course, please feel free to contact me with any questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for having me.
Thank you so much, Matti. That was a really excellent presentation on some really, really good and easy to understand examples. It makes it very tangible and very exciting to see all of the things that you're doing and working on, not just in Tampere, but in Finland all over. And on that note, Guy, the floor is yours about carbon offsetting and removals. Sorry, that word just totally got away from me. Over to you, Guy. Think you might still be on mute.
Okay, let's try again. So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matti, for a brilliant presentation. Really world-class strategy you've implemented there, and so much to learn for. So I'm going to pick up on a couple of points that you mentioned there. There's a lot of debate around carbon offsetting at the moment, and a lot of polemic around this, and a lot of, the carbon markets have collapsed in some ways. So let's kind of look at this a little bit. So I'm pretty sure most of you know this, but the carbon offset, the whole point of the carbon offset is to compensate for the carbon we emit. So there's different ways of doing it, right? Most of the projects we've seen up to today about avoiding carbon emissions. So we invest by buying a credit. A credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon, and we buy that in a forestry project. So it could be a deforestry or reforestry project, and so we're trying to reduce forestry loss, right? We could be investing in a project. There are a lot of projects out there for wind and solar power, okay? And there's now new projects about sustainable aviation fuel. These are called avoidance credits because they're there to avoid the amount of CO2 that gets emitted into the atmosphere, okay? That's good, because that's kind of like half of Janie's projects about trying to turn off some of the tap, right? She was talking about earlier. But the problem is we've got so much CO2 in the atmosphere now, well over 400 parts per million, that we need to remove stuff. So there's more and more projects that are now focused on removing as well. So these are projects that absorb or pull carbon out of the air. So planting a tree is a really simple and very effective way of pulling carbon out of the air. The only problems is that some of those trees die or they get burnt in forest fires. So there's other ways of doing it. Peatland restoration, mangrove restoration, new ways in the ocean around looking after the seas, and there's new technological ways. So there's a kind of these two areas. The problem we have today, as I said, is that 96% of all the carbon offsets in the world are actually carbon avoidance or reduction projects. Only 4% actually remove the carbon. That's a problem because our scientists tell us we have to remove 10 gigatons of carbon every by 2050, another 20 gigatons by the end of the century. So this is an amazing amount of work. Right. And then you've probably been reading in The Guardian and some things like that. There's a certain amount of projects, and it's still a very small amount of projects that actually don't do anything. Okay, so there's been a lot being picked up on this, and you may think that it's kind of 99% of all projects are bad. It's, you know, I love The Guardian and I think they do amazing work, but in some ways they focused on a small percentage of the avoidance and the reforestry projects that haven't been delivered. The market has gone through massive shake-up, new standards, new creation, and is definitely balancing out now. And I think it's great because now we can have much more confidence in the certifications delivering, you know, security and transparency in the way carbon offsets work. I'm going to come back to some of those certifications in a second. As I said, what we got to do is take that 4% of carbon removal and kind of switch it around, really, so that we have a lot more carbon being removed. There's different ways of removing carbon. So there's permanent storage solutions. Probably the one you've seen or heard more about is called direct air carbon capture and storage. But there's other ways, you know, peatland restoration, good forestry, but durable forestry and well-managed forestry is very, very effective. Looking after our soils. There's even new technologies that are around construction, taking and using kind of wood-based construction materials and storing wood in things. You may have heard of biochar as another type of technology. So there's lots of new stuff. Direct air capture, as I mentioned, is one that's really taking a lot of focus and billions of investment, especially from the airlines and the oil and gas companies, because this has the technology at a flip of a button to take a ton or a kilo of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So very, very useful. The trouble is, this is really, really expensive. It's only in very early phases. It's, you know, a fraction of a percent of all the world CO2 is removed using this at the moment. But this will grow. This is the future, and with the billions been invested in at the moment, we're going to see more of this. So what does that mean for you when you're looking at your own approaches to do this? Because it'd be nice to invest in direct air carbon capture, but you're going to be spending for hundreds, if not thousands of euros a ton to remove carbon today. Whereas there's solutions such as planting trees, or which could be around 20 to 30 euros a ton, or renewable energy portfolios, putting in solar panels, which is probably 6 or 7 euros a ton. So there's lots of solutions. Some of these solutions are avoiding, as I said, some of these are removing carbon, but actually have what we call a high risk of reversal because the forest might die burned down. And some have a good chance of removing carbon with no or limited risk of reversal, such as the technology approaches. And then some are really focused on reducing fossil fuel usage, such as sustainable aviation fuel. So what we recommend is you look at this like you're managing your pension or your income, your investments. You don't put all your money in one fund. You don't put all your money in a stock. You build up a portfolio. So we recommend you build a portfolio. Right now you're going to have more money in projects that have a lower price per ton, so more of the renewables or the reforestation projects. But over time, you want to be starting to move that towards carbon removal things. A lot of effort at the moment placed in sustainable aviation fuels. This is just a small percentage today of, I think it's 0.5% of all the fuel used in aviation is SAF, but this is going to change a lot. There's a new certification called CORSIA, because there wasn't a certification for sustainable aviation fuels. This is new, introduced last year, and this is now accredited to be part of a portfolio approach. So I think that's really interesting. There's lots of different certifications for all these different things. We love the gold standard certification. This is one of the most rigorous certifications. And they got some really innovative projects. There's projects that focus on health and livelihood benefits and the kind of other SDGs. And so, for example, the one we use a lot is the Aqua Clara water filters project, and it actually invests in buying water filters for communities in Africa. Why is that a carbon project? Because it stops people cutting down forests to burn water, or to heat up water, to boil water to make it safe to drink. So that has measurable carbon benefits, but really, really interesting health benefits. So I like to build some of that health stuff into this as well, because that kind of creates a more rounded picture. I like projects that have kind of very big community and ecosystem aspects, not just carbon, such as biodiversity and things like that. So typically when we're advising clients, we build a little bit of this. So we work with various different of our partners and, you know, have at least 3 projects, sometimes 4 or more projects. So what we're trying to do, just trying to wrap this up, you know, we want to get to net zero. Today we are offsetting, right? So we're offsetting using projects that have a lot of, this is where we would today. So a lot of the projects will be avoided fossil carbon use. We're starting to look for projects that reduce carbon emissions and have a lower risk of reversal. And then what we need to do is start to have, you know, well, again, today we're using carbon removal with high risk of reversal. This is kind of the tree planting stuff, right? But we need to kind of move some of these to the future, and by 2050, where we have carbon removal with the lowest risk of reversal as one of our key forms. I don't think it's going to be like this picture here. It's going to be a bit more balanced. It's probably a bit more about 2045. But there's going to be a whole switch. So there's a big switch in how we monitor and how we use carbon emissions and things like that. Carbon offsets. The EU is really stepping up on legislation around 2 different things on green claims, how brands are using offsetting to claim they're net zero or eco-friendly or carbon friendly, and also on the quality of the assurance programs for carbon offsetting. So, for example, already updated just a few, in March, was the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And that's the one that's already being used against 20 airlines at the moment, are being taken are being threatened with court at the moment, have been investigated by the EU for unfair and misleading communication tactics, because they're using their investment in 0.5 or 1% of all their fuel being SAF. They're using that as a way to say that they're a sustainable airline. So that's one thing that's been used. That's been used against Booking.com, Intrepid, and others around their practices. Also, a new law has been passed that comes into effect by 2026 called the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. It's not a proposal, it's a directive. And that is already saying that you cannot say you're carbon neutral by purchasing carbon credits to offset their emissions. You will have to show that they are removing carbon emissions. So that's already been passed. That comes into effect March 2026. And then after that, we don't know the exact date, but it'll be 2027 probably, or 28, is the Green Claims Directive, which is all around clearer communication guidelines and new rules. Yeah, so a lot happening there. There's new standards coming out from the EU around climate offsets and carbon offsets. A lot happening. So really interesting. I think this is really good. It's shaking up the market, but it's all good for us in terms of we have more confidence in the offsets and avoidance credits that we buy, and the removal credits that we buy will be delivering what they say they do on the tin. So really good stuff. To you, Janie.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, so we thought it was important to kind of address the kind of carbon offset versus removal, but like I said before at the beginning, a lot around, and how Guy showed, a lot around that is about reducing about 80–90%, and then kind of looking at the offsets, but maybe start building that portfolio now, depending on your target. So it's really good to kind of see where that's all at. Great. So just to wrap up, and I appreciate we're over time, so thank you very much for your patience and bearing with us. There's so many exciting things to share. I guess really the big thing, and I know many destinations have already done this, is kind of making a commitment, recognizing that this is important and wanting to take action, that tourism and events can be part of the solution. As we see, you know, as Maria kind of really interestingly illustrated, there's different areas where DMO can take action, and it's good to understand those. Where kind of do our emissions come from? What can the DMO influence? Build that knowledge. And I thought a really interesting point was like, don't just do more, but really take your time to decide what's relevant and what's meaningful and what can be the most impactful action that you can take as a DMO in different areas. There's obviously a wide range of resources available already, and we can share that with you, but we're super excited to announce that the GDS movement is launching its new Climate Action Masterclass. And that's available to kind of it's an in-house masterclass really for teams at a DMO, at an RTO, NTO, as a group to come together and learn more over 5 modules about climate change, its implications on tourism and events, and how tourism and events contribute. How do you assess that carbon footprint? What are those kind of decarbonization strategies you can implement with your supply chain as an organization, but also kind of more strategically? And how can you look at building those resilient destinations? So they're again looking at climate adaptation. So yes, very excited to launch that. And it's a really good opportunity to bring people within a DMO team together and some destination partners to really kind of understand better what climate change means and give you kind of that climate lens on the activity that you're doing. So please visit our website to find out more, or contact us anytime if you're interested in that. And then next, I'll just briefly hand over to Guy to tell you a bit more about the GDS forum happening this autumn.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, we got the GDS forum coming in October. As many of you know, some of you I can see were there. We do this with City DNA. It's in Bruges this year, fantastic location. The theme this year is Let Pigs Fly. So you probably heard that expression in English. If pigs could fly, it means if we could do and achieve the impossible, then wouldn't it be great? So we're playing with this theme of if we could do the impossible, and really unleashing this concept of the power of the unthinkable. So we're going to be playing around this at the forum. It's, you know, it's unconference, so there's no presentations, there's no kind of formal content. Instead, it's kind of a workshop on steroids over 2 days, where we'll be really having a lot of fun thinking about how can we envision and achieve the impossible. What's stopping our pigs from flying? What are the obstacles, the barriers that prevent transformation in our destinations? How do we fly our pigs a little bit better? So we'll be looking at pig flying skills. So what's the skills and the capacities we need for tomorrow? We'll be exchanging stories of pigs that flew high, so success and failures of your projects. How to propel your brilliant projects out of space, get those pigs out of space and supersonic, and then really how do we work together as a community? So really exciting stuff, and we invite you to be there. This is backed up on an amazing program at City DNA as well, so this is going to be really rocking. To see you there.
Not much else to say. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Thank you so much for your inputs on the Miro board, and thank you for your time. Really appreciate you joining us in the Feeling the Pulse.